My name is Nicole, and I'm 35 years old. Growing up, I was known as the family thief. Money disappeared from wallets. Jewelry vanished from drawers. Valuables went missing from our beautiful home. My parents' accusations shattered my self-worth and destroyed my trust in family. What I never expected was the shocking truth that would emerge years later, vindicating me completely when the real culprits were arrested. Before I share how my life was torn apart and then put back together, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you've ever been wrongfully accused of something you didn't do. I grew up in a picturesque suburb of Philadelphia in what everyone thought was the perfect family. Our Victorian home with its wraparound porch and manicured lawn was the envy of the neighborhood. My father, James, worked as a respected manager at the local bank. His reputation for honesty and integrity was unmatched in our community. People trusted him with their money and their secrets. My mother, Diana, had built a successful career as an interior designer. Her impeccable taste was evident in every corner of our home. Antique furniture passed down through generations stood alongside valuable art pieces she had carefully selected over the years. Our house frequently appeared in local magazines as an example of classic elegance. Then there was my older brother Andrew. 3 years my senior, he was the golden child of the family. His report cards were filled with straight A's, his schedule packed with extracurricular activities that would look impressive on college applications. Andrew had a natural charm that made adults smile and peers want to be his friend. My parents beamed with pride whenever they spoke about his accomplishments. And then there was me. I had always been the creative one, more interested in photography and painting than the academic achievements my parents valued. While I maintained decent grades, I never quite reached the standards set by my brother. My father would look at my report card with that small frown that spoke volumes about his disappointment. "Nicole, you could do so much better if you just applied yourself," became a familiar refrain in our household. What I lacked in academic prowess, I made up for with artistic talent. My art teachers praised my photography and paintings, but those accomplishments somehow never carried the same weight at home. Still, our family presented a united front to the outside world. We attended community events together, hosted dinner parties where my mother served food on fine china, and participated in charity fundraisers organized by my father's bank. When I turned 13, the first item went missing. It was $40 from my mother's purse. She noticed it while we were shopping for school supplies. "Nicole, did you take money from my wallet?" she asked, her voice carrying a note of concern rather than accusation at this point. "No, Mom. Why would I do that?" She studied my face carefully before nodding. "I must have spent it and forgotten. I've been so busy with the Henderson project." 2 weeks later, my father's watch disappeared from his nightstand. It wasn't particularly valuable in monetary terms, but it had been a gift from his father when he graduated college. The entire family spent a Saturday morning turning the house upside down looking for it. "Are you absolutely certain you didn't move it, Nicole?" my father asked after we had searched every room. "Dad, I wouldn't touch your things without permission," I replied, hurt that he would even suggest it. He patted my shoulder. "Of course. I'm just trying to figure out where it could have gone." The watch never reappeared, and a sense of unease settled over our home. I noticed my mother checking her jewelry box more frequently. My father began locking his desk drawer in the home office. Small changes, but they spoke volumes about a new undercurrent of suspicion. I tried to ignore the shift in atmosphere, focusing instead on my upcoming photography exhibit at school. My teacher had selected 3 of my pieces to be displayed, an honor usually reserved for older students. The night of the exhibit, I waited excitedly for my family to arrive. My brother showed up first. "Mom and Dad are running late. Something about missing earrings." When they finally arrived halfway through the event, my mother's pinched expression told me everything I needed to know. Her diamond stud earrings, a 15th anniversary gift from my father, were gone. The proud moment I had anticipated was overshadowed by whispered conversations and worried glances. On the drive home, my father cleared his throat. "Nicole, we need to have a serious talk about what's been happening." "What do you mean?" My stomach tightened with anxiety. "Things have been disappearing. Valuable things. We're not accusing you of anything, but if you're having some kind of problem, we want to help." I'm not taking anything. My voice cracked with emotion. Why would you think that? We're just exploring all possibilities, my mother said from the front seat. If you needed money for something, you could just ask us. I don't need money. Tears stung my eyes. I would never steal from you. That night marked the beginning of the suspicion that would come to define my teenage years. The perfect family facade had begun to crack, revealing something uglier beneath the surface. I lay in bed that night wondering how I could prove my innocence to people who were already convinced of my guilt. The next year of my life established a pattern that would continue for too long. What started as occasional missing items became a regular occurrence in our house. Each disappearance reinforced my parents' suspicion that I was the culprit despite my repeated denials. 3 months after the earrings incident, my grandmother came to stay with us for Thanksgiving. She brought with her a pearl necklace that had belonged to her mother, a family heirloom she planned to wear for our traditional holiday photo. The morning of Thanksgiving, the necklace was gone from the guest room dresser. The family dinner was ruined. My grandmother tried to hide her disappointment, but the absence of the necklace from our photos was conspicuous. After the guests left, my father called me into his study. "This has to stop, Nicole," he said, his voice stern. "Taking money and jewelry from your mother and me is bad enough, but stealing from your grandmother crosses a line." "Dad, I swear I didn't take anything," I pleaded. "Why won't you believe me?" "Because things only started disappearing after you turned 13. Your brother never had issues like this." The comparison to Andrew stung. He stood in the doorway of the study, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of disappointment and embarrassment. Over the next several months, the situation deteriorated further. My father discovered his collection of rare coins was being depleted coin by coin. The 1942 Mercury dime disappeared first, followed by several Buffalo nickels and a valuable Morgan silver dollar. Each time he noticed another missing coin, his eyes would find me across the dinner table. My mother's jewelry box became a source of weekly discoveries of absence: a gold bracelet her parents gave her for graduation, a pair of sapphire earrings, a silver locket containing a picture of her mother. One by one, cherished pieces vanished without explanation. The worst came during a dinner party my parents hosted for my father's colleagues from the bank. The next morning, one of the guests called to ask if anyone had found her gold bangle. She thought she might have left it in the bathroom. It was never found, and my parents stopped hosting gatherings altogether. My bedroom became subject to random searches. I would return from school to find my belongings, rearranged drawers left partially open. My private journal moved from its hiding place. My mother called it tidying up, but we both knew she was looking for stolen goods. "This is so unfair," I complained one night at dinner. "You go through my things without even asking." "We wouldn't need to if you were honest with us," my father replied. "We're at our wits' end, Nicole." They installed a new lock on their bedroom door. The key was kept hidden from me. The home office where my father sometimes brought work from the bank became off limits without supervision. My brother Andrew began keeping his distance, as if my alleged stealing might somehow be contagious or reflect poorly on him by association. My grades started to slip as the stress of constant suspicion took its toll. My once vibrant interest in photography waned. What was the point of creating art when no one in my family could see past their perception of me as a thief? Miss Thompson, the school counselor, called me into her office after noticing changes in my behavior and academic performance. "Is everything okay at home, Nicole?" she asked, her kind eyes searching mine. I wanted to tell her everything, to have an adult believe me for once. But the shame of what my family thought of me kept the words trapped in my throat. "Everything's fine, just stressed about college applications." She didn't push, but left her door open if I ever wanted to talk. I never did. The fear that she would side with my parents like everyone else seemed to was too great. My 15th birthday approached, and I dared to hope things might improve. I had asked for a small gathering with friends at our house, a movie night with pizza and board games. 2 days before the planned celebration, my mother sat me down in the kitchen. "We're going to have to cancel your party," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "What? Why?" "Mrs. Abernathy from next door came by yesterday. Her daughter's bracelet went missing during their last visit." "And you think I took it?" It wasn't a question. "We don't know what to think anymore, Nicole. But we can't invite people over when things keep disappearing. It's embarrassing for all of us. I spent my 15th birthday alone in my room, crying into my pillow to muffle the sound. My brother came home late, having been out with his friends. He paused at my door, hand raised as if to knock, then continued down the hall to his room. Even he had given up on me. The breaking point came during Christmas that year. My mother's aunt had given her an antique brooch years ago, a piece that had been in the family for generations. My mother wore it to Christmas Eve service at church, but by Christmas morning it was gone from her jewelry box. The joy of the holiday evaporated as accusatory glances were thrown my way with each opened gift. By now, I was firmly established as the thief in our household. No evidence was needed, no benefit of the doubt extended. The pattern had been set, and I could see no way to break it. By the time I turned 16, the label of thief had become a permanent part of my identity in my family's eyes. My protestations of innocence fell on deaf ears, dismissed as denial or pathological lying. The wall of trust between us had been completely dismantled brick by brick with each new accusation. That spring, my father's sister, Aunt Susan, came to visit from Colorado. Unlike the rest of the family, she had always shown a special interest in my photography and artistic pursuits. During her stay, she took me shopping for my birthday, just the two of us. "I want to help you start saving for college," she said as we sat at a cafe after shopping. She handed me an envelope. "It's not much, but it's a start. Keep it somewhere safe." Inside was $500 in crisp bills. I was speechless at her generosity and the implicit trust it represented. Someone in my family still believed in me and my future. When we returned home, I carefully tucked the envelope into my desk drawer beneath my sketchbooks, where I thought it would be safe. I didn't tell my parents about Aunt Susan's gift, knowing they would either confiscate it for safekeeping or accuse me of getting money through dubious means. 3 days later, the money was gone. I tore apart my room looking for it, panic rising in my chest. I knew what would happen next, the inevitable accusation, but this time I couldn't understand the logic. Why would I steal my own money? That evening, my father confronted me in the living room, my mother and brother standing by like silent witnesses to an execution. "Susan told us she gave you money for college," he began, his voice dangerously calm. "It's gone, Dad. Someone took it from my drawer." He laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "That's a new one, Nicole. Stealing from yourself to throw us off the scent." "Why would I do that? It was my money." "Was it?" My mother joined in. "Or did you make up this story about Susan giving you money to cover up taking it from somewhere else? Call her and ask her." I was shouting now, desperation making my voice crack. "We already did," my father replied. "She confirmed giving you the money, which makes your little performance right now even more disturbing." "I didn't take it." "Why won't you believe me? Someone else in this house is stealing and you're all too blind to see it." My outburst unleashed years of pent-up frustration and hurt. Everything came pouring out, every unfair accusation, every searched room, every canceled plan, and lost opportunity, because I couldn't be trusted. By the end, I was sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. My brother watched from the staircase, his expression unreadable. My mother looked away, unable to meet my gaze. Only my father seemed unmoved by my emotional breakdown. "We've tried to handle this ourselves," he said when I had quieted to hiccuping sobs. "But clearly this problem is beyond our capabilities. You need professional help, Nicole." The following week, I found myself sitting across from Dr. Winters, a therapist specializing in adolescent behavior problems. The office was designed to be comforting with soft lighting and comfortable chairs, but nothing could ease the injustice of being there under false pretenses. "Your parents tell me you've been having some trouble with taking things that don't belong to you," Dr. Winters began. "They're wrong. I've never stolen anything in my life." Dr. Winters made a note on her pad. "Denial is common in these situations. We can't begin to address the behavior until you're ready to acknowledge it." Every session followed the same pattern. Dr. Winters working from the assumption of my guilt, me insisting on my innocence, and neither of us making any headway. After our fourth session, she had a private meeting with my parents. I wasn't allowed to attend, but the outcome became immediately clear when we got home. My bedroom door was gone, removed from its hinges and stored in the garage. Dr. Winters thinks you need closer supervision, my mother explained, not meeting my eyes. This is for your own good. My own good, I have no privacy now. You lost the right to privacy when you betrayed our trust, my father replied. New rules were implemented with clinical precision. I was no longer allowed to be home alone. My backpack was searched every day after school. I was excluded from any family discussions involving money or valuables. My movements were tracked through constant check-ins, and I had to account for every minute of my day. Through it all, only Aunt Susan showed any doubt about the family narrative. During phone calls, she would ask careful questions, never directly challenging my parents, but leaving space for alternative explanations. Have you considered having your house checked for security vulnerabilities? She asked my father once when I was within earshot. A friend of mine discovered neighborhood kids were coming in through a basement window while they were at work. My father dismissed her concerns. We know where the problem lies, Susan. Please don't undermine what we're trying to accomplish here. One afternoon, I came home early from school when a photography club meeting was canceled. The house was supposed to be empty, my mother at a client consultation and my father at work. As I walked upstairs, I heard noises from my bedroom. I found my mother reading through my private journal, the one place I still recorded my thoughts and feelings. What are you doing? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She jumped, closing the journal guiltily. I'm trying to understand Nicole, to find some explanation for why this is happening. By invading the last bit of privacy I have left. We're worried about you. Dr. Winters suggested there might be clues in your writing about what's triggering these behaviors. I snatched the journal from her hands. Get out. Just get out. Later that week, I discovered something even more violating. While searching for a missing earring under my bed, I found a small device taped to the bed frame. It took me a moment to recognize it as a miniature camera positioned to capture most of my room. The discovery broke something fundamental inside me. My own parents had moved beyond distrust to active surveillance, treating their daughter like a criminal under house arrest. That night, I made a decision that would alter the course of my life. I would endure until my 18th birthday, and then I would leave this toxic environment and never look back. The 2 years between my decision to leave and my actual escape were an exercise in patience and strategic planning. I understood that I needed resources to break free from my family's control and build a new life elsewhere. With that goal in mind, I began working part-time jobs that my parents reluctantly approved since they could verify my whereabouts. I worked weekends at a local coffee shop and evenings at the public library. Every dollar I earned was carefully saved, hidden in a bank account my parents didn't know about. I had opened it with Aunt Susan's help, using her address for statements, so nothing would come to the house. My grades, which had suffered during the worst of the accusations, began to improve as I focused on creating an escape route. I needed scholarships if I was going to afford college without my parents' financial support. I knew they would be reluctant to help the daughter they couldn't trust. Mr. Ramirez, my art teacher, became an unexpected ally in my quest for independence. He recognized my talent for photography and encouraged me to build a portfolio for college applications. This series on urban decay is exceptional, Nicole, he said, reviewing my recent work. Have you considered applying for the Westridge Scholarship? It's specifically for promising visual arts students. With his guidance, I applied for the competitive scholarship along with admission to several art schools on the West Coast, as far from Philadelphia as I could reasonably go. My parents were peripherally aware of my college applications, but showed little interest in the details. Art school is an expensive way to avoid getting a real education, my father commented when I mentioned portfolio deadlines. The acceptance letter from California College of Arts arrived on a rainy Tuesday in April. I had been accepted with a partial scholarship based on my portfolio. Mr. Ramirez's letter of recommendation had apparently made a significant impression on the admissions committee. The Westridge Scholarship notification came a week later, covering another portion of the tuition. I still needed additional funds, and this led to the most difficult conversation of my planning phase. I needed to ask Aunt Susan for help. I'm not surprised you want to go far away, she said when I called to tell her about my acceptance. But how are you planning to manage financially? I explained my scholarship situation and the savings from my jobs, highlighting the gap that remained. I wouldn't ask if there was any other way, Aunt Susan, but I need to get out of this house. There was a long pause on the line. I can help with some of the costs, Nicole. Not everything, but enough to get you started. On one condition, you maintain contact with me and let me know you're safe. I promise. I agreed, fighting back tears of relief. When I finally told my parents about my college plans, their reaction was predictably dismissive. California. That's clear across the country, my mother said. That's the point, I replied quietly. And how exactly do you plan to pay for this? My father asked. I have scholarships and savings from my jobs. Aunt Susan is helping with the rest. His face darkened at the mention of his sister. Susan needs to stop interfering in our family matters. This isn't about the family. It's about my future. A future built on what foundation, Nicole? Trust honesty you haven't demonstrated either in this house. I bit back the angry retort that sprang to mind. Just a few more months, I reminded myself. Just endure a little longer. The day after graduation, I packed 2 suitcases with everything I cared about. My photography equipment, clothes, and the few mementos that hadn't been tainted by years of suspicion. My mother watched from the doorway as I prepared to leave. I don't understand why you need to go so far away, she said. Don't you? I met her gaze directly. Would you want to stay in a place where you're treated like a criminal every day? We only did what we thought was necessary given the circumstances. The circumstances being that you decided I was guilty without evidence and nothing I could say or do would ever change your minds. She had no response to that. My father drove me to the airport in silence. Our goodbye was brief and formal, more like business associates parting than father and daughter. Call when you arrive, was all he said before driving away. The flight to California represented more than physical distance. With each mile, I felt the weight of accusation and suspicion lightening. By the time the plane touched down in San Francisco, I was breathing more freely than I had in years. My first apartment was a tiny space shared with 2 other students, Jessica and Tara. The luxury of having roommates who knew nothing about my past, who accepted me at face value, was indescribable. For the first time since I was 13, I wasn't the thief. I was just Nicole, the photography student from Philadelphia. College became my sanctuary. I immersed myself in classes developing my artistic voice through photography projects that often explored themes of perception and reality. My professors praised my unique perspective, unaware of how it had been shaped by years of being disbelieved. During my sophomore year, I met Michael in a digital media class. Our relationship developed slowly, my trust issues creating barriers that took patience to overcome. He never pushed, never demanded explanations for my occasional panicked reactions when things went missing in our shared spaces. Whatever happened before, it doesn't define who you are now, he told me one night after I apologized for accusing him of moving my camera lens. With time, I built a new identity for myself. I graduated with honors and secured an internship at a small gallery in Oakland. The internship led to a full-time position as their media coordinator, managing their online presence and photographing exhibitions. Throughout these years, I maintained minimal contact with my parents. Birthday calls, Christmas cards, occasional updates about my professional progress always met with lukewarm acknowledgement. I visited home once a year, enduring the strained conversations and unspoken accusations that still lingered in the air of that Victorian house. My brother Andrew, now working at our father's bank, remained distant during these visits. We had become strangers connected only by genetics and shared childhood memories, most of which were now tainted. Only Aunt Susan remained a constant support, visiting me in California whenever her teaching schedule allowed. Through her, I received filtered updates about family matters, enough to stay informed without direct engagement. By 28, I had established my own photography studio in San Francisco, specializing in architectural photography for design magazines. I had built a reputation for reliability and integrity, words that would have seemed laughable to my family years before. I had created a life beyond the shadow of their suspicion, a life that was entirely my own. And then came the call that would change everything yet again. The call came on a Tuesday morning as I was preparing for a client meeting. Aunt Susan's number flashed on my phone screen. Nicole, your father had a heart attack last night. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Despite everything that had happened, the news hit me with unexpected force. Is he? I couldn't finish the question. He's stable now. They did an emergency procedure and inserted a stent. But it was serious, Nicole. Your mother is asking for you to come home. 24 hours later, I was walking through the doors of Philadelphia General Hospital, a knot of conflicting emotions tight in my chest. 7 years had passed since I'd left home with only brief, tense visits in between. Now I was returning under circumstances I had never anticipated. My mother looked older than her 58 years as she sat beside my father's hospital bed. Andrew stood by the window, his familiar profile now sharpened with adulthood. Neither of them had expected me to actually come. Nicole, my father said weakly from the bed, you didn't need to fly all this way. Of course I did, I replied, surprising myself with the sincerity in my voice. The following days established a new routine. I stayed in my old bedroom, now converted to a home office but with a pull-out sofa. During the day, I helped my mother manage household tasks while she spent time at the hospital. In the evenings, I took over the hospital vigil, allowing her to rest. My father's recovery was projected to take weeks, with significant lifestyle changes required afterward. As the initial crisis passed, practical matters came to the forefront. My mother was overwhelmed by the sudden responsibility for financial and household management that had always been my father's domain. I need to organize his papers, she said one morning over coffee. The insurance forms alone are impossible to understand. I can help, I offered. I handle all the accounting for my studio now. She hesitated, old suspicions visibly warring with current necessity. That would be helpful, thank you. In my father's home office, I began sorting through medical bills and insurance documentation. As I organized papers, I noticed discrepancies in some of the bank statements, withdrawals that didn't match any obvious expenses, transfers between accounts that seemed unnecessarily complicated. Mom, do you know what these transfers are for? I asked, showing her the statements. She glanced at them briefly. Your father handles all that. Something to do with investments, I think. He's always moving money around. The explanation seemed reasonable, but something about the pattern bothered me. I made a mental note to ask my father directly when he was stronger. A few days later, Andrew came by the house to drop off some documents from the bank. I was surprised to see him during business hours. Taking an early lunch, I asked. Just running some errands for Dad, making sure everything keeps running smoothly while he's out. There was something in his tone that caught my attention, a note of strain beneath the casual words. Before I could question him further, the doorbell rang. A man I didn't recognize stood on the porch. I'm here to see Andrew, he said when I opened the door. Andrew appeared behind me. Carter, I told you to call first. You're not answering your phone. We need to talk about the situation. They moved to the back porch, voices too low for me to hear their conversation. Through the kitchen window, I could see their body language. Tense, urgent. When Andrew came back inside, his face was flushed. Who was that? I asked. Just a client worried about some investments with Dad being out of commission. He grabbed his coat. I need to get back to the bank. That evening, as I sorted through more paperwork, I discovered a folder labeled Personal Investments, tucked behind other documents. Inside were records of substantial withdrawals from various accounts, including my parents' retirement fund. Nearly $30,000 had been moved over the past year alone, with vague notations about property opportunities. When I mentioned these findings to my mother, she dismissed my concerns with uncharacteristic sharpness. Your father has always been very private about his investments. I'm sure there's nothing to worry about. Her reaction only increased my suspicion that something wasn't right. The next day, I visited my father at the hospital while my mother was at home. Dad, I've been helping organize your paperwork, and I noticed some unusual financial movements. Is everything okay with the accounts? His reaction was immediate and defensive. You shouldn't be going through those papers without permission. Mom asked me to help with the insurance forms. I wasn't snooping. The irony of having to defend myself against such an accusation wasn't lost on me. Those transactions are nothing for you to worry about, he said firmly. Private investments. I decided to approach the situation from another angle. During lunch with Richard, my father's longtime colleague at the bank, I carefully broached the subject. Dad's recovery is going well, but I'm concerned about the stress of managing everything when he returns to work. Richard nodded sympathetically. We've all been concerned about James for some time. The pressure he's been under. What kind of pressure? Richard looked uncomfortable. I probably shouldn't say anything, but since you're helping with his recovery, there have been some irregularities noticed by the auditing department. Nothing concrete, but enough to raise eyebrows. This revelation sent a chill through me. What exactly was happening with my family's finances? 2 days later, I received an anonymous text message from an unknown number. Check public storage on Westfield Road, Unit 342. You'll find what you're looking for. My journalistic instincts, honed through years of investigative photography assignments, kicked into high gear. The next morning, I drove to the storage facility on Westfield Road. The office attendant was reluctant to provide information until I explained that I was helping my father organize his affairs after his heart attack. Unit 342 is registered to an A. Preston, she told me, checking her computer. Paid up through the end of the year. A. Preston. Andrew Preston. My brother's name and our mother's maiden name combined. I'm Nicole Preston, I lied smoothly. My brother asked me to pick up some documents he needs. I'll need to see some ID, she replied. I showed her my driver's license, hoping she wouldn't notice that my last name was actually different now. She handed me a visitor pass without comment. Unit 342 was in the back corner of the facility. The padlock required a key I didn't have, but years of photography in abandoned buildings had taught me some useful skills. 10 minutes later, I was inside the unit, staring in disbelief at its contents. Boxes lined the walls. In them, I found my grandmother's pearl necklace, my mother's missing jewelry, including the diamond earrings and antique brooch, my father's watch and rare coin collection, even items I had forgotten about, small valuables that had disappeared years ago when I was still living at home. In one corner stood a desk with a laptop and files. The files contained records of sales to pawn shops and private collectors across 3 states. Bank statements showed deposits to an account I didn't recognize, and there, in a folder labeled Emergency Exit, was a passport in my brother's name, with stamps from various countries, along with information about offshore accounts. The realization hit me with physical force, nearly bringing me to my knees. Andrew. It had been Andrew all along. My golden child brother had been systematically stealing from our family for years, selling the items and building a secret financial cushion. And I had been his perfect scapegoat. Everything suddenly made horrible sense. The timing of the thefts, the missing items that only family would know were valuable, the way Andrew had distanced himself as the accusations against me mounted. He hadn't been embarrassed by his sister, the thief. He had been maintaining his cover. I took photos of everything with my phone, careful not to disturb the evidence. This would require more than just my word against his. As I prepared to leave, I noticed a small box on a shelf labeled Nicole's College Fund. Inside was the $500 Aunt Susan had given me years ago, still in the original envelope. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, unleashing a wave of cold fury unlike anything I had ever experienced. Andrew hadn't just been stealing to fund whatever lifestyle or addiction he was hiding. He had deliberately framed me, systematically destroying my relationship with our parents and my own self-worth in the process. With the evidence secured, I faced the most difficult decision of my life. Exposing Andrew would devastate my already vulnerable parents, but keeping his secret meant allowing the true thief to continue operating while my reputation remained tarnished. Justice demanded the truth be revealed, no matter how painful the fallout would be. Back in San Francisco, I had developed a network of professional connections, including Jennifer Lawson, an attorney specializing in financial crimes. I called her from my hotel room the evening after discovering the storage unit. I need confidential advice on a family situation involving possible fraud and theft. I explained, keeping details vague. Family matters can be the most complicated legal situations, Jennifer replied. Can you come to my office tomorrow? The next morning, I laid out the evidence for her. The photos of stolen items in the storage unit, the records of sales to pawn shops, the financial documents showing unexplained transfers, my own history as the family scapegoat. Jennifer listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair with a sigh. You have several options here, Nicole. You could confront your brother privately and demand restitution. You could present the evidence to your parents and let them decide how to handle it within the family. Or you could involve law enforcement, which would likely result in criminal charges given the value of items stolen and the apparent bank irregularities. What would you recommend? Legally speaking, these are serious crimes. The statute of limitations hasn't expired on most of them. Beyond the theft from family members, if your brother has been misappropriating bank funds or client money, that crosses into a whole different category of offense. The weight of the decision pressed down on me. My entire childhood and adolescence had been destroyed by Andrew's actions and my parents' willingness to believe the worst of me. Part of me wanted justice, wanted him to experience even a fraction of the pain and isolation I had endured. Another part remembered my father in his hospital bed, vulnerable and recovering from a heart attack. If I go to the authorities, what happens next? They would investigate, likely get warrants for the storage unit and financial records. If the evidence supports your claims, your brother would be arrested and charged. Given the amounts involved and potential bank fraud, he could be looking at significant prison time. I thought about it for a long moment. I need to do this. Not for revenge, but because it's the right thing to do. He's been stealing from vulnerable people who trusted him, including our own family. Jennifer nodded. I'll help you file a proper report and navigate the process. 2 days later, I sat in an interview room at the Philadelphia Police Department's Financial Crimes Division. Detective Morales recorded my statement as I walked through the timeline of thefts, the discovery of the storage unit, and the financial discrepancies I had noticed while helping organize my father's papers. We'll need to get warrants, Detective Morales explained. In the meantime, I recommend not confronting your brother or alerting him to the investigation. Does anyone else know about your discoveries? Only my attorney. I haven't told my parents yet. That's probably for the best until we can verify your claims and secure the evidence. The next 48 hours moved with agonizing slowness. I continued helping my mother with household management while avoiding Andrew as much as possible. Each time the phone rang, I expected it to be Detective Morales with news. The call finally came on Friday afternoon. We've executed the search warrant on the storage unit and seized the contents. We've also obtained financial records through subpoenas, Ms. Walker. We're going to be arresting your brother today. You should prepare your parents. I hung up the phone, my hand shaking. How could I possibly prepare them for this? I found my mother in the garden pruning roses. Mom, we need to talk. Something serious has happened. She looked up, noting my expression. Is it your father? Has there been a setback? No, it's not Dad. It's about Andrew, and about all those thefts years ago. Before I could continue, police cars pulled into our driveway, lights flashing but sirens silent. Detective Morales and 2 uniformed officers approached the front door. What's happening? My mother's voice rose in panic. Nicole, what have you done? Her immediate assumption that I was somehow responsible cut deep, but I had no time to address it. Detective Morales showed her identification. Mrs. Walker, we have a warrant for the arrest of Andrew Walker on multiple counts of theft, fraud, and embezzlement. Is he here or at the bank? This is absurd. My mother's face had gone white. There must be some mistake. There's no mistake, Mom, I said quietly. Andrew has been stealing from this family for years. He's the one who took everything, not me. The next hour passed in a blur. My father had to be informed by phone at the hospital. Andrew was arrested at the bank, led out in handcuffs past shocked colleagues. News spread quickly through our small community, the same community that had watched me grow up under a cloud of suspicion. By evening, our home had become the center of a storm. My mother alternated between disbelief, anger, and desperate attempts to contact attorneys who might help Andrew. My father, against medical advice, checked himself out of the hospital to deal with the crisis. This can't be happening, he repeated as he sat heavily in his favorite chair. There has to be an explanation. There is an explanation, I replied. Just not the one you've believed all these years. As the initial shock wore off, details emerged through police reports and preliminary hearings. Andrew had begun stealing small items from our home when he was 15, selling them to fund a gambling habit that had started with poker games at a friend's house and escalated to online betting. His childhood friend Carter had helped fence the stolen goods, taking a percentage of each sale. When suspicion fell on me, Andrew saw an opportunity to continue and expand his activities without scrutiny. The more my parents believed in my guilt, the more freely he could operate. What had begun as teenage theft had evolved into sophisticated financial fraud as he gained access to bank accounts and client funds through his position at my father's bank. The confrontation I had both dreaded and anticipated came 3 weeks after Andrew's arrest. My parents had finally requested that we sit down together to discuss what had happened. Andrew, released on bail pending trial, would be present. The living room where we gathered held so many painful memories for me. Arguments, accusations, tears. Now we sat in tense silence until my father finally spoke. "I want to understand how this happened." Andrew stared at the floor, unwilling to meet anyone's eyes. "It wasn't supposed to go this far." "How far was it supposed to go?" I asked, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "Far enough to destroy my relationship with my family, far enough to make me doubt my own sanity when I knew I wasn't taking anything." "I needed the money," he said, as if that explained everything. "It started with small things just to cover some debts. Then you got blamed and it was convenient." Convenient? The word hung in the air, grotesque in its inadequacy. "I never thought Mom and Dad would believe it was you so easily." There was a note of accusation in his voice, directed not at me, but at our parents. My mother made a small, wounded sound. "We trusted you, Andrew. We never questioned." "You never questioned him," I corrected. "But you questioned everything about me. For years. You searched my room, read my journal, put a camera under my bed. You took away my privacy, my dignity, my sense of safety in my own home." My father's face had aged a decade in the past month. "We were wrong, catastrophically wrong." "The money Aunt Susan gave me for college," I said, turning back to Andrew. "That was particularly cruel. You took that from my drawer knowing it would devastate me." "I was desperate that month. Carter was threatening to tell everyone about our arrangement if I didn't pay him more." The details continued to emerge throughout the evening. How Andrew had carefully selected which items to take. How he had planted subtle suggestions about my behavior to reinforce my parents' suspicions. How he had used Carter as his fence, establishing connections with pawn shops across 3 states to avoid detection. "Why the storage unit?" my father asked. "Why keep the items instead of just selling everything?" "Insurance," Andrew replied. "Some pieces were too recognizable to sell right away. Others had documentation I might need someday. And some," he hesitated, "some I just couldn't part with permanently." Sentimentality from the person who had systematically destroyed my adolescence seemed like the final insult. As the night wore on, the full scope of Andrew's crimes became clear. Beyond the family thefts, he had embezzled nearly $200,000 from the bank over 3 years, manipulating accounts and records to hide the withdrawals. The money had funded an increasingly desperate attempt to recover gambling losses that had spiraled out of control. "I always thought I was one big win away from fixing everything," he admitted. "I could replace what I took and no one would ever know." The big win never came. Instead, Carter had eventually been caught selling a piece of recognizable jewelry in Pittsburgh, which led police back to their operation. He had agreed to testify against Andrew in exchange for a reduced sentence. By the time we finished talking, dawn was breaking over Philadelphia. No resolution had been reached, no forgiveness granted or denied. Just the brutal truth finally laid bare after years of lies and misdirection. As Andrew left to return to his apartment, now under electronic monitoring pending trial, he paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I am sorry, Nicole. Not just for getting caught, but for what I did to you." "It's worth very little," I replied. "But it's a start." 6 months after Andrew's arrest, I stood in my San Francisco studio staring at the photographs arranged on the wall. Images of locked doors, empty jewelry boxes, and shadow-filled rooms formed the core of my new exhibition, Presumption of Guilt. Creating the series had been both therapeutic and painful, each image forcing me to revisit moments from my past while reclaiming my narrative. The legal proceedings against Andrew and Carter had moved forward with methodical precision. Andrew had eventually accepted a plea deal to avoid a lengthy trial, receiving a 5-year sentence for the embezzlement charges and additional time for the years of theft. Carter had received a shorter sentence for his role as an accomplice. The aftermath within our family had been more complicated than any legal proceeding. My mother had fallen into a deep depression, blaming herself for failing to see the truth and for the years of unjust treatment she had inflicted on me. My father, still recovering from his heart attack, seemed to have aged a decade in a matter of months. The realization that his golden child had systematically stolen from the bank he had spent his career building was almost more than he could bear. For my part, I had returned to California after ensuring my parents had appropriate support systems in place. Distance provided the space I needed to process my complex emotions, vindication tinged with sadness, relief mixed with lingering anger, and the disorienting experience of having my identity as the family thief suddenly stripped away. Dr. Elena Rivera, my therapist in San Francisco, had been instrumental in helping me navigate these turbulent emotional waters. "What you experienced was a form of gaslighting," she explained during one session. "For years, your reality was denied and replaced with a false narrative. Recovering from that takes time." "Sometimes I still feel like I need to prove my innocence," I admitted, "even though everyone now knows the truth." That's a normal response to long-term psychological manipulation. Your brain established certain protective patterns that won't disappear overnight. With her guidance, I began the slow process of rebuilding my sense of self and addressing the deep-seated trust issues that had affected every relationship in my adult life. My conversations with my parents evolved during this period, moving from raw pain toward something resembling honest communication. My father, in particular, seemed determined to acknowledge the depth of the injustice I had endured. "I failed you as a father," he said during one of our weekly phone calls. "I was so certain I knew what was happening that I never questioned my assumptions. I let you suffer for years rather than consider I might be wrong." "Why was it so easy to believe I was stealing?" I asked, finally voicing the question that had haunted me for so long. "What made me the obvious suspect rather than the son you always trusted?" His silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "You were different," he finally said. "Creative, independent, questioning our values in ways Andrew never did. I think on some level I was already worried about you taking a path I didn't understand. When things started disappearing, it confirmed fears I didn't even know I had." It wasn't a satisfying answer, but it was an honest one. The truth was that my parents had found it easier to believe the worst about me than to question their assumptions about the child who reflected their own values and choices. My mother's journey toward reconciliation took a different path. Rather than philosophical discussions, she focused on concrete actions. She boxed up my childhood photographs and art projects she had preserved, sending them to my San Francisco apartment. She forwarded articles about photography exhibitions she thought might interest me. Small gestures of recognition that accumulated over time. Aunt Susan remained my steadfast ally throughout the process. "I always knew something wasn't right about their accusations," she told me during her visit to see my exhibition. "I just couldn't imagine Andrew was capable of such calculated cruelty." "None of us could," I replied. "That was his greatest advantage." The exhibition opening brought unexpected closure. I had invited my childhood friends, many of whom had drifted away during the years when my family situation had become increasingly strained. Their presence represented a kind of restoration, connections reestablished after the truth had finally emerged. Most surprisingly, my parents flew in for the opening night. They moved awkwardly through the gallery, visibly uncomfortable with the artistic representation of our family's painful history, but determined to show support. They paused longest before a photograph titled "Presumed Guilty," which showed a teenage girl's room with the door removed from its hinges. "This was powerful work," my father said afterward, his voice rough with emotion. "Difficult to see, but important." "Thank you for coming," I replied, finding that I genuinely meant it. 2 weeks after the exhibition opened, I received a letter from Andrew sent from the correctional facility where he was serving his sentence. I left it unopened on my desk for 3 days, uncertain whether reading his words would provide closure or reopen wounds. When I finally opened it, his message was brief. I saw the newspaper article about your exhibition. Aunt Susan sent it to me. I understand now at least a little what I took from you beyond the material things. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I recognize the depth of the harm I caused. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be someone who deserves to be your brother again someday. I didn't respond immediately. Perhaps I never would. But the letter represented something important: acknowledgement. After years of denial and deception, the truth had finally been spoken aloud and recognized by everyone involved. My path forward wasn't about forgetting or even necessarily forgiving. It was about reclaiming my narrative and rebuilding my life on my own terms. The false identity that had been forced upon me had been shattered, allowing space for authentic self-definition. In the months that followed, I met David through a mutual friend at a gallery opening. Unlike previous relationships, I approached this one with a new openness, sharing my history early rather than hiding it behind walls of protection. His response, a simple, "Thank you for trusting me with that," marked the beginning of a connection built on honesty rather than fear. The journey from accused to vindicated had been long and painful, but it had also shaped me in ways I was only beginning to appreciate. I had developed resilience, empathy for others facing unjust accusations, and a commitment to truth that informed both my personal relationships and my artistic work. As I prepared for my next exhibition, I found myself moving beyond the narrative of victimhood toward something more complex and empowering. The experience of being wrongfully accused had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. I was Nicole the photographer, Nicole the partner, Nicole the daughter and sister, navigating a complex family history, Nicole the friend and mentor. The facets of my identity extended far beyond the false label that had once consumed me. The truth had finally set me free, not just from others' misconceptions, but from the limitations I had placed on myself in response to years of injustice. That freedom, hard-won through pain and persistence, was perhaps the most valuable thing I had ever possessed, more precious than any of the stolen heirlooms that had finally found their way home. Have you ever been wrongfully accused of something you didn't do? The pain of not being believed can leave lasting scars. But as my story shows, the truth has a way of eventually coming to light. If this story resonated with you, please share your experiences in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button if you'd like to hear more stories about overcoming injustice and rebuilding trust. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that your truth matters even when others refuse to see it.